Coming in at number 5, we've got Danny / Malfeitor. Well, we'll kick it off pretty simple with a throwback to the horror movies of the 80s. Ouija Board is a Ouija-themed romp through the mean streets of California, ranging from house parties to construction sites to an ever-infamous lake sequence. It's pretty cheesy, but there are definitely some good bits if you're into 80s horror. We kick off the introduction to evil presences with a good old-fashioned group session. While her boyfriend is off getting drunk, Linda gets her hands on her ex's Ouija board and summons a presence in front of a crowd, and that is not a euphemism. The partygoers meet Danny, a young boy who died a tragic death and is now communicating with everyone through the board. Things get heated between Linda's current and ex-boyfriends, which results in Danny slashing the tires of a car. Whoops. Danny's still a good kid though. The next day, Linda decides to call up Danny again and see how he's doing, but this time she brings out the board all alone without any guidance. Bad call, as the presence that shows up says he's Danny but is hiding his true identity. Always a bad sign. The presence helps Linda find her engagement ring and never gets dismissed. This means it can stick around and do what it wants, wherever it wants, whenever it wants. And what it wants is to kill any and everyone who might get in its way. See, this presence that claimed to be Danny on the second day was actually that of Carlos Malfeitor, an evil spirit. The man was an axe murderer in life, gunned down by police while trying to escape capture. As it turns out, he lived in Linda's house way back before she moved in. He'd been waiting for an opportunity to possess someone for ages, and this was the perfect time. Using progressive entrapment, he slowly but surely works towards being able to take over Linda and enter back into the living world. This results in plenty of death and destruction along the way, including almost getting her boyfriend arrested for the murders. So while you're using a Ouija board, do some research about where you're using it. If a bunch of nasty stuff occurred at your location, don't do it. Also keep an eye out for demons pretending to be other people. That one's a little harder to make sure of though. Coming in at number 4, we've got Kelly. This name doesn't sound so bad, but if you like your head to remain upon your shoulders, avoid it at all costs. Seriously though, this demon is sending out all of the warning signals possible, so if you end up dead, it really is your fault. She first showed up when a young lad was trying out Ouija with his older brother and cousin. They set up the board, got things ready to rock, and began to ask questions. With the lights out and candles lit, things were about to get spooky. And spooky things got. The young lad had a doll with him at the time, and this doll went by the name of Kelly. Uh-oh. Of course, it was good to have such a figure for comfort while doing something so potentially scary. So when the planchette started moving, he reached for his doll. However, Kelly was missing in action. Panicked, the kid looked back to the board and saw that it was spelling something. K-E-L-L-Y. Oh my goodness. Soon after, the ritual ended and the boys were considerably shaken. The youngest one looked frantically for his doll, but to no avail. However, later she was found, without her head. Someone or something had taken the doll, popped its dome off, and hidden the pieces away. If you ask me, this is a kind of warning, a sign of things to come. The next time you try to use a Ouija board around here, the demon might spell your name. And then your head might go missing. Not the kind of injury that's easy to recover from, yeah? Coming in at number 3, we've got Doris. Back to some movie magic for a moment. Doris is the exceptionally upsetting demon featured in Blumhouse's Ouija series. She turned out to be the main villain in the first one, and then the prequel explores her tragic backstory. Demons with sad stories are always the worst, eh? You want to sympathize with them, but then they're out here trying to kill everyone and singing sad songs. It's a whole mess. Doris had her mouth sewed shut by her mother to prevent evil spirits and voices from taking over, and eventually passed on, becoming one of these presences summoned by the board. Once she became a demon, Doris possessed many people. Anyone foolish enough to summon her using a board would be taken over and killed in horrific ways. Doris will make people hang from Christmas lights by their own doing, or put their heads through porcelain sinks. That's gotta hurt, and there's no coming back from that kind of head trauma. There's some swimming pool antics, some stitch-mouthed ghost antics, the whole 9 yards. Even though Doris was just a girl, as a demon she has a whole lot of anger and terror to express. And what better way to express your demonic urges than through a killing spree? Sounds like fun. So if you'd like to keep your bathroom pristine and your head unmunched, stay away from that Ouija board. Coming in at number 2, we've got Shush. This one comes from another supposedly true tale where average folks messed with a board and paid the price. Everyone knows how embarrassing it can be to be shushed, especially by a stranger. So what about a paranormal stranger? One with the potential to shut you up for good? It doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun if I'm being totally honest, but that's exactly what happened here. Two friends decided to take a swing at some Ouija board antics and plopped one down on their table. They tried for a little while to contact any sort of presence, but came up short. After asking a few more questions, they returned to the top, asking questions like, "Is there anyone here that would like to communicate with us?" This apparently was the last straw, as the planchette immediately moved to no. Thinking this was their chance to finally talk with someone from the other side, they pushed further, asking more questions. But the presence did not appreciate this and used the planchette to spell out S-H-U-S-H. Shush. Holy moly, it just wanted some peace and quiet. After this, the room felt considerably colder and the pals didn't want to see what would happen if they didn't follow the presence's instructions. Something tells me it wouldn't have been pleasant. I could see a demon stealing someone's voice or permanently sealing their mouth for not being quiet when told. So who wants to play the quiet game? I'll start. Coming at number 1, we've got Zozo. Now, you know we couldn't do a Ouija demon list without including one of the newest and most prolific entries into the ghostly pop culture oeuvre. Zozo seemingly hasn't been around that long, and his popularity is largely attributed to internet culture gassing him up. There might be brief mentions of this demon in assorted old compendiums and grimoires, but nothing concrete, and the old writings don't really connect him to Ouija boards or possession either. But Zozo is a famous demon now, and those tend to do exactly what people expect them to do. The more we discuss him, the stronger and more bold he grows. Many who have encountered this demon feel its presence for years after the fact, regardless of whether they close the session or not. One tale recounts a man almost seeing his drown in the bathtub, attacked by Zozo. Others say that the demon acts like a poltergeist, ruining their homes and injuring them frequently. If your planchette moves from Z to O to Z to O, yes, I am Canadian, say goodbye and throw it in a fire. Nothing good will come from any further interaction. Can you still buy Ouija boards at Toys R Us? Well, their bankruptcy might prove to be a bigger barrier than the actual availability of the board, but still. I've always wondered if spirits knew the difference between mass-produced boards and special ones. I suppose you could just make one on a sheet of paper and go from there, even on your wall, Stranger Things style. Coming in at number 5, the Undead Witch. Generally speaking, you should avoid undead witches. The living ones can be reasoned with and are often quite pleasant to converse with, even if you yourself are not a follower of Wicca. The ones who perished and through some dark magic managed to make it back to the realm of the living, those are the ones you gotta watch out for. Nobody wants to be at the receiving end of a hex or spell cast by a practitioner of magic who has returned from the grave. No thank you. An unfortunate cohort of Ouija-using pals accidentally summoned one though, and the results were less than pretty. After procuring a Ouija board through some pretty standard methods, a guy named Justin and his pals decided to have a little seance, all in good fun of course. Fun is just how those things start though, and it quickly took a turn for the worse. The friends open up the session and begin to ask questions of the presence they had summoned. At first there was no response, but the intrepid paranormal enthusiasts pressed on dauntless, looking for some sort of message from the other side. Then the planchette started moving. Slowly at first, it swayed back and forth between the four corners of the board, picking up speed as it went. Soon it was just doing quick laps around the board. The circle shifted and undulated as the planchette began drawing out new shapes on the surface, freaking everyone out. They called it off, closed the circle, and decided to do something else. However, when Justin tried the board again, this time with a different friend, the results were the same, a slowly shifting planchette eventually reaching a fever pitch. After that second experience, he started to notice strange things happening. He would wake up in the middle of the night with the sensation of someone grabbing his arm. His pals that participated in the paranormal practice reported similar events. Looking into it, they discovered that this experience could have endowed them with a hex. From beyond the grave, this witch decided to weave some spells and made some mischief. Hopefully the folks on the receiving end are okay now. Coming in at number 4, close the circle. Now, this is just good advice for anyone interested in Ouija. Make sure that you fully understand the ritual before going in and performing it. Walking in half prepared will always end in disaster, so do not wing it. Read up on the process, ensure you understand what must be done, and for goodness sakes, make sure to close the ritual at the end. You can do everything else right, from starting with a good mindset, to being polite and patient with your summoned spirit, to refraining from asking for physical signs that they are present. But if you don't move the planchette to goodbye at the end of the session, whatever presence you've brought into your home is liable to stick around. and experience most foul. Some will be friendly, amicable spirits from the great beyond, willing to interact and leave without any trouble. But you can't believe everything a spirit tells you on a Ouija board, and many times demons will appear under the guise of a good-natured individual. This is where things can get dangerous. Take poor Vince, who once used a Ouija board as a child. He and his brothers managed to summon a Russian spirit who claimed to have been murdered in cold blood. A classic origin story for sure. But after they stopped communicating, the brothers decided to go get some food, without closing the circle. When they returned to the basement, the energy had noticeably shifted. A dark, heavy presence was here, and things were not as they were. Books and toys had been flung around the room in a whirlwind, but the Ouija board still sat in the middle, undisturbed. Apparently, when Vince looked into the mirror in the basement, he noticed that the eye on the Ouija board was looking around the room, as if searching for something. The brothers moved the planchette to goodbye and resolved never to do that again. Coming in at number 3, we've got a scorched corpse. Could be Freddy Krueger, could be someone else. I'd rather not take that risk though. It seems that whenever kids spend the night somewhere unfamiliar, they witness unexplainable phenomena. The result of overactive imaginations perhaps? Or is there something to these visions of the paranormal? Well, you could ask those who decided that a sleepover in an old school gym was a good idea what they saw. Christy and her soccer team had set up for an overnight stay at the school gym. Sleeping bags, snacks, scary stories, you name it. But someone brought a Ouija board, and that could not be resisted. The teammates gathered together and started the ritual, seeing if anyone from the school's history would show up. When they finally made contact with somebody, it spelled out words like thirst, and fire, and help. Then the spirit moved the planchette to goodbye, and that was that. They asked around the next day and discovered something disturbing. Apparently there had been a fire at this very location a long time ago, burning the building to the ground. Could it be that a poor, unfortunate soul was trapped in this inferno and now haunts the rebuilt gym? Coming in at number 2, we've got some solo advice. I'll do one more advice column contribution to this Ouija video just to make sure any curious individuals go in knowing as much as they possibly can. Never use a board on your lonesome. Not only is that a goofy, dorky thing to do, it can also be very dangerous. It takes 2 to tango, and it also takes a duo to draw upon the spirit world. Don't underestimate the power of the paranormal. In many dramatic interpretations of Ouija use, folks who go about it alone end up way worse for wear. Often they'll end up summoning something that will attempt to possess them, emboldened because they're alone. Or sometimes they'll simply be unable to control any aspect of the ritual and see some things that are quite upsetting. One story comes from an individual named Sarah who decided she wanted to contact some spirits in her free time. Unable, or maybe unwilling to gather some friends in time, she sat down with the board and planchette all alone. This proved to be a very bad call almost immediately as the planchette shot out of her hands and across the room. Needless to say, she did not attempt this again. Another tale comes from Oceana, who similarly wanted to see what spirits were around but refused to gather a group. When she started the ritual, nothing seemed to happen. A little perplexed, she began to clean up, but as she was moving candles, she noticed something quite spooky indeed. The planchette was moving totally on its own with Oceana nowhere near the board. She rushed over and moved it to goodbye and hasn't attempted a seance since. And finally at number 1, we've got summoning sleep paralysis. Most folks looking to dabble in Ouija will find a board and use it somewhere they feel safe, at home or maybe a friend's place. But if you're serious about finding some paranormal activity, notably haunted areas are the place to be. In visiting these locations, you're essentially accepting responsibility for whatever spirits or demons you encounter though. Take Aaron and Arjun, 2 friends who found a Ouija board and decided to take it to a graveyard. Definitely a place known for harboring spirits and the like. At the graveyard, the duo attempted to summon something and failed, or so they thought. After their uneventful seance, they returned home and went to bed. Late that night, Aaron experienced sleep paralysis for the very first time. Unable to move, he saw a ghostly woman with long black hair slowly floating towards him. Some might chalk that up to a coincidence, or maybe the fact that Aaron was a little spooked from his late night excursion. However, Arjun called up Aaron the next day and told him about an identical experience. The 2 friends had somehow summoned a spirit that followed them both home and began invading their sleep. Goodness gracious. Whether you're using satanic toothpaste or attempting to communicate with presences beyond our immediate understanding, there's a lot of risk when you dabble in the paranormal. Be careful while investigating things yourself and do your best to research before you go. Otherwise you could end up with a sleep paralysis demon or a hex upon you and your family.
Number 5 on this list is a sad story of a husband and a wife. I was unable to learn their names, but for the purposes of this video, let's call them Anna and Tom. The story takes place back in 1935 1995 when the pair were married and living in Texas. They were in their late 30s when their marriage started to crumble. Anna had really taken to the Ouija board that she had gotten and often went to it for advice and answers. She had suspected for quite a while that Tom had been cheating on her. She believed that the affair was ongoing and happening with their next door neighbor. She consulted her Ouija board and it confirmed these suspicions to her. After hearing this, she accosted her husband about this affair, which he vehemently denied. She didn't believe him though and kept consulting the Ouija board, and it kept giving her the same answer. Tom wouldn't budge though, and every time she asked him, he swore that he would never do that to her, and the Ouija board was lying. After several weeks of this, Anna started to lose her mind. One day, while Tom was asleep, she took some wire and tied his limbs to the bedpost. He woke up naked and unable to move, his wife staring down at him with a makeshift whip. She proceeded to torture him with the whip, then a burning poker stick, and then with a kitchen knife. Finally, she grabbed the gun that Tom had and held it to his head. When she did this, he told her what she wanted to hear. That this entire time, the Ouija board had been right and that he was sleeping with the neighbor. Rather than kill him, Anna actually loosened the restraints and was relieved to have her suspicions proved right. Tom, fearing for his life though, lunged for the gun that she'd put on the nightstand and he shot her, killing Anna, his wife, where she stood. What makes this message so demonic is that Tom was never actually sleeping with the neighbor, or at least that's what he claims. The torture became far too much for him though, and he was willing to admit to anything just to try and stay alive. Clearly, a demon decided that Anna was in a vulnerable place, and this would be the perfect time to not only ruin her marriage, but also her life. Number 4 on this list is Angelah Jackson. Angelah was a young girl in her 20s from Australia. She became obsessed with a Ouija board to communicate with her father, who had passed away roughly 2 years ago. She was very close with her dad, and letting him go was super hard for her. Whenever she would contact him, they would have a good conversation through the board. However, her father always made it clear that this has to be the last time that she uses this board. He implored her to stop contacting him. This wasn't because he didn't want to talk to her, but simply his spirit recognized the dangers of this tool, and there may be a time where it isn't him that she connects with. Angelah heard his warning, but proceeded to use it anyways. Whenever she was lonely, or something big happened in her life, or she just missed her father, she would pull it out. One day, Angelah felt the urge to contact her father, and she did exactly that. She pulled out the board as she normally would. She asked some questions, except this time, it wasn't her father on the other side. The room felt cold, and the light seemed as if it was being sucked away by the shadows. The demon on the other side, it was not kind, and made its intentions known, spelling out the words, "Kill yourself." Angelah wholeheartedly refused to do so after multiple requests, so finally the demon spelled out, "I will then." Petrified at this point, she threw the Ouija board in her closet and refused to touch it. She didn't want to fully throw it away though, because if she did, that would be ultimately admitting that her father's gone. She did eventually change her mind though and get rid of it about a week later, but it took a near-death experience for her to do this. She was attacked late at night by what looked to be a crazy man with an axe. He almost killed her, but she managed to get away with her life. Convinced that this was the work of the demon that she must have contacted, she threw the Ouija board away, and she never looked back. Number 3 on this list is a story from a man named Steve. Now, Steve's story already starts out poor because the Ouija board that he ends up using is one that he and his friends found in a dumpster. Once they pulled it out of there, this board started working for them almost immediately. The one problem is that it was in Latin, and only one of the people there could understand what it was saying. It apparently wasn't saying anything menacing off of the top, just kind of weird and creepy things. Steve didn't like this thing at all, and he was definitely spooked, but curiosity got the better of him. He didn't truly believe that a spirit was guiding his hand and wanted to understand the logic of how it was happening. As you're all expecting, this was a poor choice by Steve, and he inevitably had to pay for it. Steve went to sleep that night at a little bit past midnight. When he woke up, it was 3 a.m. in the morning, and he was standing straight up, playing with what looked to be a drawn-on Ouija board on the wall. He couldn't control his movements. He was just watching as his body mindlessly moved around the Ouija board, spelling things out. The first thing that he saw his hand spell out was, "Why are you hurting me?" Then the next thing was, I need your spirit. Steve was locked in to this frozen state, but he still had his mind. He says that it took every ounce of mental energy he could muster to try and break out of what felt like this demonic Ouija curse and regain control of his movements. He fell to the ground in a deep sweat, staring at what he had done in complete shock and awe. The Ouija board was dealt with right away, and it wasn't long after that Steve sold his place and moved to a completely different city. Number 2 on this list is from a woman named Tanny. A few years ago, Tanny lived in Chicago with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend, who is now her ex, had just lost a very close friend and was going through a rough time. Trying to be a supportive girlfriend and help him get through it, she thought that maybe getting a Ouija board would be a good idea. Her initial thought was to help him get a little bit of closure on the whole experience and maybe to speak to his friend one last time. Obviously, as it often happens with these boards, that isn't how the whole scenario went down. The couple set up the board in their living room and started using it like one typically would. At first they weren't feeling anything at all and just thought that this was standard. But then a chill filled the air. Both Tanny and her boyfriend felt an enormous weight hit their bodies and a deep sense of depression. This came along with a horrible sense of foreboding that something awful was about to happen. This was very strange because the board itself, it wasn't actually giving them any strange answers to the questions. That part felt as if everything was normal. Even though this strange feeling about something to come scared the pair, they kept playing with the board. It didn't take long after that for both of them to stop though. In the corner of their living room appeared a black, fleshy humanoid creature that looked as if it was one with the shadows. Tanny saw this and screamed at the top of her lungs, but when her boyfriend looked, it was completely gone. She swore that she saw something and refused to play anymore, demanding that they go to bed. It took her a very long time to fall asleep after that, but eventually she did, and that's where the message came. Dipping into this deep dream, Tanny vividly remembers how real it all felt. She claims that she has never felt a dream that seemed so close to reality like the one that she had that night. She materialized in a forest, and standing in front of her was the dark demon being that she saw in the corner of her living room earlier that night. Her heart raced, and she tried to run, but her feet were stapled to the ground. The demon glided its way closer to her, and when it was only a few feet away, said, "Your first child will suffer like his friend." Then it took its black, fleshy hand and shoved it into her stomach, stabbing her with its long fingernails. She woke immediately, feeling as if she just got stabbed and punched in the stomach all at once. She hasn't tried to have children since then, but she doesn't believe that she ever will. She is convinced that the demon was referring to her boyfriend's friend, in which case her first child would die. Something that she doesn't believe she could ever cope with. Number 1 on this list comes from a Reddit user named Jake Nichols. Jake recounts the story of how he and his cousin used a Ouija board one evening and immediately regretted it. The first thing to note about this story is that the Ouija board was found in the attic of their home when they were cleaning it out. It was an older board and looked as if it had been up there for years. Whilst they were cleaning out the attic though, they removed a few other items from there, old clothes, some furniture, other small knickknacks as well. Anyways, they opened up this Ouija board and set it down on the ground of their home to test it out. They started messing around with it and were having a pretty good time until they started to notice a pattern. It seemed as if it would only accurately respond to Jake. To test the theory, Jake asked it a question only he could possibly know the answer to. What is my social security number? The board moved from one number to the next, to the one following that. It did this 9 times to produce what was Jake's exact 9-digit social security number. Absolutely shocked, Jake and his cousin asked the spirit to show itself. Bad move though. This board slowly picked the letters D-O-L-L. Doll. Now doll, what does that mean? We asked you to show yourself and you wrote doll. And then Jake remembered. While they were cleaning out the attic, one of the knickknacks he removed was this very old doll of a girl with red hair in a little brown dress. This doll had been sitting on top of the Ouija board when they went up there. The boys rushed in the room where they put all of the knickknacks, and when they got there, standing up on its own 2 legs was that very same doll with a sick, sadistic smile across its face. Its eyes looked alive and pierced directly into Jake's soul. Then, defying all logic, the doll's mouth moved and sounds came out. "You woke me up, Jake. I was sleeping." Jake and his cousin's heart were pounding quicker than they have ever felt in their lives. The doll made one final drilling stare, and then it fell to the ground, lifeless, as if it had been there the whole time. Jake and his cousin immediately took the Ouija board and the doll and burned them outside. They both stayed in another home that night as well, fearing that whatever they released may still be on the hunt.